All right, welcome everyone to our 16th session of our series between the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and EdTechTeacher. Today's session is going to focus on communication and support strategies for families with Google for EDU. I see a bunch of you guys have joined us live. We also are posting all of these recordings on our YouTube channel too, so make sure to check that out. I believe one's going to get sent to everybody that's on the registration list, but we are going to be curating all of these into a series of, I think, 17 or 18 different video webinars that you guys can check out at any time on demand. If you would like to access the slides at any point today, click on that link. Well, type that link in at the bottom first, but I'm going to put a lot of links throughout to resources. So that bit.ly link there on the bottom left, bit.ly/ETTDESE16. That should get you to the slides. I'm going to just keep that link on the bottom of every slide as I go through. So even as people jump in later, they can just go in and add that. If for any reason that's not working for you, please add that to the chat and I'll make sure that you guys can get access. Okay, really quick introduction, then we're going to jump in. My name is Tom Driscoll. I'm an instructor for EdTechTeacher. I've been working with this group for several years now. Before that, I was a digital learning director at a regional school district in Rhode Island, the Bristol-Warren Regional School District. I was working with teachers from K to 12 on all types of tech integration. We started our rollout of one-to-one devices around 2015, all the way up to one-to-one, and then doing all sorts of cool stuff there. Before that, I was a secondary social studies teacher in 2 different public school districts in Connecticut. So that is my background. If you guys wanted to do a quick introduction in the chat, I've been doing this for each session. It's nice to see who we have with us. Please add in your name, the school district that you're joining us from, as well as your particular role. So if it's a school integrationist or technology specialist, you could put that. If it's a grade level teacher or subject area, please add that to the chat, just so we can see who's joining us today. All right, so there's 2 different main focus areas for the session. The first is thinking about what are those resources that we can provide to families, and what communication strategies can we use to help empower them, right? And that's what I really want the goal of today to be, is that all of the resources that I'm going to show you, they're not necessarily just for teachers or just for educators. Really, they're for us to learn about, to learn from, but then also share and empower families with, right? Because this isn't just on us, it's everybody's in this together. So that's the way that I've designed it. I'm going to pull mostly from some Google EDU resources at the beginning, but this isn't just for Google for Education. I'm also going to bring in some other high quality resources as well. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is in the second part of the agenda, I do have a few sample schools and districts that have done a great job of this. One of them we've actually found through some of our work at EdTechTeacher, working with schools around the country. I believe this one was actually shared with me by Gail of EdTechTeacher, who I think just joined us in the chat. So that's a school in Pennsylvania, but the other ones are actually here in Massachusetts that do a great job of kind of curating and sharing out resources with families. All right, so first off, Google for Education actually does have a lot of resources that you can use and share as part of this family communication strategy. And I think that some of these are pretty well known, but others are kind of buried. And I'll be honest, a lot of the Google for Education resources are great, but sometimes they're hard to find just because there's so many different layers of Google for Education and so many places to look. So this first one I wanted to show you is actually a very simple 1-pager, right? So anytime you see on a slide throughout this whole presentation, if you see that little icon, right? Well, first of all, every image should be clickable, anything that I link here. So if you click on it, it should bring you to the website. Also, that little pointer, if you click it, it should bring you there too. So if you have the slide deck open, you want to check it out, this just brings you to that 1-pager handout for best practices for family engagement. Now, if you are very limited on time, like most of us are, this might be a great place to start. It just has some quick tips, and you can even just send this out right away to any of your parents. I'm going to take a deeper dive into some of these that are in here, but again, just wanted to point that out, is that's a nice little one-stop shop if you're just getting started with this and you want to share it out with your staff or with your families. All right, so the next one is, this is a little bit more involved, but I came across this earlier last school year. It actually came out, I think, around the summer of 2020. And it's the Tech Toolkit for Families video series. Now, just to put this in context, this is right after the pandemic started. A lot of schools, were actually almost everyone was shut down in the spring. And this was developed over the summer to help schools with hybrid and distance learning. However, it's not just for that, right? So a lot of the skills that are in this toolkit in this video series are helpful for everybody, right? So they're helpful for schools, whether they're live in session, hybrid, blended, in person, all of that, because a lot of it is the basics of Google for Education in the classroom. So just a couple of the topics that they go through. The first is, what is G Suite for Education? What is Google for EDU? Especially for maybe families that are new to the area or even new to the country and they don't know what any of this is. It's a good introductory to what Google for Education is for schools. Then it goes through some of the specific apps. So like one specific to Chromebooks, like what is a Chromebook? Why does your child have one? How do you care for it? Google Classroom, how do you engage in a Google Meet? What are some accessibility tools? So a lot of great videos here. And I also like the brevity of them. They're short and to the point, because if you give like a link to a 15-minute video to a parent on Google for Education, let's face like a lot of, like I'm a parent, like a lot of you guys are, we don't have time for watching like hours of instructional videos necessarily, but 2 to 3 minute videos, I'll take a quick look. So definitely a nice practical guide there. Again, if you click on it, it'll bring you to that playlist. So once you go there, it's pretty much like any other YouTube channel. You can subscribe to Google for Education. You can get the link to this playlist. Or if you just want to pick one specific one, like say, hey, I just want to share out the one on the Be Internet Awesome curriculum, you can click on that and then share that out with whoever needs it. All right, so the next part has to do with Guardian Summaries. Now, most of you on the call have probably used this before. You've probably maybe even set this up with your district, but I'm still surprised at how much confusion remains in school districts. So as I mentioned, my kids go to schools. I'm engaged with a lot of schools through EdTechTeacher, and the questions still come up a lot of times, like, what do these Guardian Summaries mean? How do I adjust how much I get them? Why is one parent getting it and not another? Or it could be like, hey, how come this teacher it's getting us Guardian Summaries, but this one it's not? So there are a lot of questions that remain around this. So I would say if there are any lingering issues in your district, or maybe if you haven't leveraged it that much, it may be worth diving into some of those resources. So the first one is actually a guide that has a few different versions of it, right? So this is the Guardians summary guide for the Guardians themselves, right? So this one here, if you go down, it'll walk through, all the different settings that you can design. It has screenshots. I know a lot of districts that have taken this and kind of wrapped it into their own in-house resource and shared it out. So that's one. The other one that's helpful is for teachers, because sometimes even on the teacher side, it may not necessarily be turned on correctly. Some people may not realize that if it's turned on once, it's turned on for all the teachers, like in a team. So a couple quick things that you can check out there. All right, so next one has to do a little bit more with the digital citizenship part of it. So now that you have your device, now that you're logged in, what are you doing with it? How are you keeping yourself safe? How are parents helping keep their kids safe? And this has been something that was certainly exacerbated over the past year or two, the issue itself. Kids have been on screens more than ever before for a variety of reasons. And a lot of it has been because of schoolwork being online so much. So that does become a challenge, right, for schools, for families, and we have to think about how do we navigate this. And we also need to think about how do we build in the skills for students to safely access all of this online. So this particular resource is aimed more for younger students. This might be more elementary, middle school, early middle school. There are a lot of resources I'm going to share later, particularly from Common Sense Media and from ConnectSafely, that are designed a little bit more about for middle and high school age students. But this first one, what I really wanted to share was the Be Internet Awesome curriculum. It hasn't really gained as much traction as far as like a PR standpoint. Like Google doesn't really talk about it much, but it is there. And I think it's really good. So if you want to check it out, it's their own kind of in-house digital citizenship curriculum. The link that I shared with you guys, was actually the parent version of it. So there's an English and a Spanish guide. But I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of how to use it as a teacher. That's, you can go in and check that out yourself. And typically a lot of library media specialists have heard of this and done it with their students or shared it already. But this is one for tools for home, right? So what I like about these is it kind of walks through, if you're a parent, especially of an elementary student, what are some of these things to look for and skills to build? And it may make sense for them to actually go through this. I know some schools do like family workshops and parent workshops. It might be worth maybe having like one theme per day and talk about some of these different strategies. And what else is nice about this guide is as you go through, it gives you some context, but it also gives you specific things that you can do with your own family, right? So just some family activities, some scenarios, some questions you can ask your kids. And then it also gives you the correlated game, right? So if the kids are into gaming, which what kid isn't at this point, after you go through that idea, then for instance, this one goes to Mindful Mountain, is the game in Interland, which is actually part of the Internet Awesome curriculum. So then after they do maybe an activity or ask some questions with their students, then they can go on and play that simulation. So again, I think it's a valuable resource. And I think that it's nice that Google actually went through and made not just a teacher version of this, but a family version. So for all of you that have kids out there too, if you want to show them this, especially, I think really is designed for like upper elementary. A lot of those students can really dive into this and have some fun. So the game itself is actually on a different site. It's called Interland. If you haven't checked this out, it's a pretty straightforward kind of like open world style game, but each one of like the different worlds that they go to focuses on a different theme, right? So it could be privacy, it could be safety, it could be online communications and conflict. So it depends on the theme that you're doing, but you kind of go through, you have your character. You don't have to worry about accounts and logins and student data privacy and all of that stuff. It's really just designed to just jump in and play and then just pick one of the scenarios. Okay, so that's a great resource from Google itself. Now, this next one's interesting. And if anyone has some insights on this from a school department standpoint, let me know. But I share this out with even all my friends, families. Google has their own kind of digital security / safety app called Family Link. And if you haven't seen Family Link, it's actually really powerful. So I've actually downloaded it for my own kids' devices, right? So on my phone, I have the Google Family Link app. So if I were to pull it up, I would have my son, Blake and Liddy, and then I link whatever accounts they sign into and devices that they sign into. I can see and control some of the apps that they're downloading or their screen time. I can see, what percentage of time they're spending. So Apple has their own version of it, right? But here's what's tricky, right? Is that if you're a Chromebook school, obviously you're not going to have all that iOS ecosystem where Google does with the Family Link app. So I would actually explore this if you haven't thus far, of seeing how you might be able to use this with your Chromebooks even, right? So if parents have the Google Family Link app and students are using school issued Chromebooks at home, there is a way that they could actually sign in a way that they could use those Family Link settings and monitoring tools on the school issued Chromebook. Now, I don't want to step on any toes here. Like if you are a tech director or you have a different way of doing it, if you don't necessarily want Family Link involved, that's perfectly fine. But I think it's at least worth exploring, because I do know a lot of parents have been concerned over the past couple of years where school issued Chromebooks were going home. Kids were on it at all different times. They were on YouTube links that they didn't want them on. So this could be a way to help address that. Now, whether parents use this with the school issued Chromebooks or not, I still think it's a valuable tool, especially for parents that have either Android devices or Chromebooks just as devices at home. So just a couple quick things that you can do with it. As I mentioned, you can go through and see what content they're accessing. You can manage their apps. You can push out specific recommended apps that maybe your school district is recommended, like Scratch Junior, for instance. You get screen time limits, and then you have automatic locking of their devices at certain times. And they also have location, right? So my son's going to middle school next year. Having a location on there is going to be helpful, right? So I think definitely something to check out. And it's also available on an iPhone. So I don't think you just have to have a Google phone to use this. You could actually download the Google Family Link app on an Apple phone. All right, so enough of that, but I do think it's worth checking out, whether just to share with parents or for your school district. Really powerful tool from Google. All right, so if you're interested in a video that walks through how to actually add a school account for Family Link users, this is actually a quick tutorial. It's about 2 to 3 minutes. It doesn't go into the weeds of like the admin council and all of that stuff, but it does give you kind of the overview of how a teacher or a family member would add in that Family Link app. All right, so this is the last one that's within the Google for Education suite of tools. And I've mentioned this at a few different webinars in the past. So those of you that are joining me again, apologize for repeating myself, but this is such a versatile platform. I thought it was worth bringing it up again. It's called the Applied Digital Skills Program. And the reason why I'm bringing it up here is that a lot of times it's not just the student that needs some help and support using these apps. It's the parents themselves, right? So if parents maybe need help checking an email, going on to Google Classroom, just even how to manage a browser. Like, so there's a lot of basic skill sets that we assume all parents know how to do. That's not always the case. So if you go to the Applied Digital Skills Program, I showed in the past, they have teacher-centered versions of this, where if you wanted to go in, set up your classroom, push out these assignments to kids. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole now, but that's a great useful tool. What I'm talking about now is some of those other uses of it. If you wanted students or families wanted their sons or daughters to just jump in and go into some of these student self-paced modules to learn a certain skill, they could do that. If parents wanted to set up little mini projects on their own, they could go and do that. So basically they would assume the role of like an instructor. They would have like their own mini class basically, but it would just be their own kids that are in it. And then they could assign certain projects for their students within the platform. And then this last one, this is important too. This is for parents themselves, right? So what are some of those digital skills that will help them, right? So it could just be everyday life. So, how do I use digital tools to send an email, to search on the internet, to create a document? How do I use Google Drive? How do I share a file? Anything from that all the way to like, how do I plan to make a budget, right? How do I track my expenses? How do I write a resume? How do I, write a cover letter for a job? So I think there's a lot of resources here designed more for adults as well, that this could be a really good resource for your families. And again, I'll bring up this concept again. A lot of schools across the country are doing parent outreach. They're doing either after school workshops, maybe during the day workshops, or partnering with a local library or community organization to help build up some of these skills. This may be a nice tool in the toolbox, right, for that type of work with your family. So definitely check out the Applied Digital Skills platform. All right, so that's basically it for the Google for Education version of this. If anyone else has any kind of homemade versions, for lack of a better term, of a Google guide for parents from your school district, I'd love to see it. The participants in the chat would love to see it. So if you have access to any of that or a website that you'd like to share, please add that. We are going to go into some district examples towards the end, but if you have any in the meantime that you want to add into the chat, we'll double back to that towards the end of the webinar, and then take a look at any that you guys may have in-house yourself. All right, so now we're going to transition to a different organization. This one's called Common Sense Media, and you've probably heard of this one before, so I'm not going to spend too much time giving you an overview of it, but essentially it provides teachers and families with a wide variety of resources. The one that I want to point out right at the beginning is the one on Google Classroom. And I think this is helpful because, one, it's the most widely used learning management tool that's out there. A lot of people would debate whether it's even a learning management system or not, but the whole point is that it's used across the country, and parents a lot of times have questions about its workflow, And then just even things about like privacy, how does it work? I really recommend taking a close look through this one yourself, because here's what I like about it. It's more of a third-party objective view, right? So Google for Education provides some great internal resources, but this one also provides some real critiques of some things that may happen, right? So in Google Classroom, there may be instances where they could engage in cyberbullying, right, with each other. That's just the reality of it, right? So I think sometimes just kind of saying it and being out front and thinking about how do we combat this and deal with it, and that's what we're going to talk about with some of the resources coming up soon. I think this is a little bit more of an objective view. So just to show you what this looks like, if you go to the Common Sense Media page, first off, it has a quick video overview of it. And I think it's worth showing it. It's only like a minute long, but just to give you kind of an idea of the tone and the objectivity of this resource.
Here are 6 things parents should know about Google Classroom. Number 1, the basics. It's a free online resource that allows students to see what's due, complete assignments, and post messages in virtual classes set up by their teachers. Number 2, it can be used at home or anywhere else. Once they download the app, kids can access Google Classroom with any internet-connected device, including their phone. Number 3, parents should know that the platform isn't without risks, which include data tracking, potential contact with strangers, and even cyberbullying. Number 4, while Google has stricter privacy practices for its educational apps, it can collect student data from some of the classroom tools, like YouTube, if they're enabled. Number 5, there's not a lot to prevent kids from opening other tabs that might invite cheating or chatting. That said, if they're taking a quiz in Google Forms, teachers can disable access to other resources. And number 6, there are settings to make things safer. If your kid uses a personal Gmail account for Classroom, you can adjust their privacy settings on their Google account page. For more advice to fit your family, become a member at commonsensemedia.org.
All right, so they have a lot of quick kind of like bite-sized videos like that. And then as you scroll down, it really goes into depth about the ins and outs of Google Classroom, how you could use it, but then some really practical questions, right? So, how do I communicate with my child's teacher through Classroom? What are the safest settings to put on my son or daughter's account? What control do I have? What control do the teachers have? What does Google do with the student data? So I think that these, even though they can seem a little bit dense in getting into the weeds of things, parents have questions about these things. And I also think as educators, we should know a lot of this too. Like if we have no idea what student information is being collected and how they're using it, then that's kind of an issue, right? So I think we need to dive into this ourselves as a profession, but then also help communicate that with parents. And, I'll be very honest with you guys and up front here. Like when I was a director at a school district, we were first rolling out Google for Education. Like I clearly understood all of the benefits of it. And when I would get some like pretty direct questions from folks about certain things like this, like my first initial reaction was like, hey, like, wait a minute, like this is good for kids. And I almost not taken offense to it, but I almost kind of got in a defensive mode, trying to defend certain things. But parents have legitimate questions, right? And I think that especially the way that things have changed over the past year or two with just the view of like the tech industry and the things going on with Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff, like having a healthy skepticism of some of this thing is sometimes a good thing because it shows that parents care and that they're thinking about it. Right. So I wouldn't just dismiss those conversations. I would invite them in and just make sure that you have some resources to back up your claims and share those out with parents as they come up. So again, just embracing those conversations because it is also going to make us more knowledgeable about this as we go through it. Okay, so that was one example, is that Google Classroom. The next one, this is more video heavy, and actually I find that videos tend to be a little bit more engaging, not just for kids, but for parents. But this is an entire library of parenting tips, right? And what I think is helpful about this is they do a good job of staying up to date on all of the new apps and trends, right? So if you go into this part of the Common Sense Media Library, you can see that, for instance, 5 things I should know about Zoom, 6 ways to keep VR safe and fun for kids, Things that I should I think one of them down here is like, things I should know about Roblox, right? So that's one I should probably watch because my daughter plays Roblox and I have no idea what it is. So that's a parenting fail on my part. So, but these things come out so fast. It's like fast and furious. So actually this one's perfect. My son plays Minecraft all the time. My daughter plays Roblox. What the heck are these things? And what are some things that I should be aware of? So again, their whole profession really at Common Sense Media is to stay up to date on these things. So I think it's really helpful to just kind of keep an eye on what's coming out. They do have a newsletter that comes out that you can sign up for, but these are nice places that you can check out. All right, so if you wanted to do age appropriate, this is also part of it too. So if I want to say, hey, what are some parenting tips, but I don't care about apps that about learning how to read. It's more about what are they doing with these devices as a teenager. So this would just kind of filter through some more of those for older students. Okay, next one I wanted to share is they have other subtopics that you can take a deeper dive into. So one of them being cell phones, cell phone use. How old should my student? That's the big debate, right? So what year should my student get a cell phone? What kind should they get? What restrictions do I put on it? What are some screen time limits I should consider? What's the difference between the types of screen time? Social media use. What are the platforms they're using? What's going on there? How are they, interacting? The privacy and online safety. That's another big one too, because that also talks about what are some of those tools that you can use to help provide some of those guardrails for your students, for your kids. All right, so all of these are really important, but I think each one does a good job of kind of walking through resources that are helpful for students. But I also like how they frame it with questions, right? So this is one like, is it safe to post pictures of my kids online, right? So I bet a vast majority of parents that are on this call right now have posted pictures of their kids online. So I'm not saying like there's anything wrong with it, but if you do have questions about what you're posting, where you're posting it, what you're tagging it with, what is the company doing with all this stuff? That's why I like it invites questions as opposed to just saying what to do and what not to do. It's just like, hey, what are some questions people might have as they go through from preschoolers all the way up to older students? The one thing that you may want to keep in mind, though, is that every school district is a little different when it comes to their social media policies. So I would always kind of double check with their stance on it, because some schools want you to communicate with students and families through social media. Like they encourage it, they want you to. Other districts are like, not a chance. We have our own internal social media messaging system. And I actually know a lot of school districts that are buying their own social media platforms for their school. So I'm not here to say like what's better or worse. It's just know the difference, because I have seen some scenarios that get very tricky when a teacher is meaning well, but does something that is opposed to district policy, and vice versa. Maybe a lot of teachers are like, hey, this makes most sense as far as a social media policy and communication. Maybe you adjust that district policy. So just something to really take a closer look at. There's no easy answer to it, but certainly something to have a conversation about. Okay, so that's it for Common Sense Media. Now I'm going to shift to another organization that I think is just fantastic and has a ton of resources. Their education director is Carrie Gallagher. She actually works here in Massachusetts. A lot of you on the call or that are watching this video have probably seen some of her presentations and workshops over the years. She actually just presented at our EdTechTeacher conference last fall, had an amazing session like usual. But one thing that I like about the ConnectSafely is they have a lot of very practical resources that you can use with your kids at home, with your families. So one that I just want to show you quick as an example is they have these pledges, right? And what I mean by pledges is kind of like based on what you're doing with kids, whether it's giving them a cell phone or giving them a tablet, what are some like ground rules that you can set up with them, right? So this is an example of a contract that you would make, say, with a younger child, right? So if you're giving them a tablet for the first time, what are some of those ground rules that you might set up that you go through with them? And you don't have to actually sign a contract, but I just think these are nice little templates that you can use either as a school to share out with parents or as part of your own school usage policy if you're still designing it or revising that. So this is a good example. They have other versions of it. So they have one that's more designed for teens, I'm sorry. And then the other thing is they have one for families. One of the family ones that I love too that folks add in there is that, parents can't yell at their kids to get off their phone while they're on their phone. So just again, like kind of, having these ground rules, but then kind of living it and being a good digital role model. Like if you spend your entire dinner never looking up from your social media feed, that's not a good, model for students that might be getting a phone coming up soon. Okay, so that's the idea about the family contracts. A couple other things that I like with this too are they have, similar to what Common Sense Media have, but parent guides to the different applications, right? So this is the one that I definitely need to read, is the Roblox one, right? But they have all the different apps, all of the different devices that are out there, and then some of the different themes and topics that you may want to double down in. So let me see here. So Parents Guide to Roblox. So if my son is playing this, or say they're asking for it, and I'm not really sure if I want to enable that yet, you can go through, check it out, see what it's about, see some of the community rules. What are some things that you should consider as far as the social part of it? And again, that's the big part of these games, right? Is that the games inherently aren't necessarily good or bad, but a lot of it's that community of people that play it. You want to know who's in there, what type of people typically play this, and what settings and things should you talk to your kids about before they engage in these online platforms? Because that's really, I think, where some of the danger comes into play, is not the game itself. It's that interaction that you may not want to have a complete wide open network of folks for your kids to be jumping into. And we haven't even got into VR yet, but I'm sure a lot of your students, or maybe your own kids, have things like an Oculus Quest. A lot of those games are kind of like these open environments where people can interact with anyone around the world. That's incredibly powerful, but can also be dangerous. So thinking through some of that as well. And actually ConnectSafely and Common Sense Media both have guides to VR. It's crazy to think about, but that is the next step in the reality of gaming. And we got to kind of get a step ahead of that if we can as educators, because that's coming quickly. All right. Now we're going to move into a few different examples of school districts that have curated resources for students. You can take a look at some of the different ways that they've pushed it out to parents, the way that they've organized the content. And then I'll open it up for any questions at the end. But just to give you guys an idea of, once we have all of these resources, of course, you could just share it out directly with your teachers, or your teachers right to your parents. But I still think it's nice to curate things in one central location, if at all possible. If nothing else, just so that we're not reinventing the wheel with everything. I mean, one thing that frustrated me a lot when I was an instructional technology director is that I felt like so many people were doing the same exact thing, but in their own little silos, where if we just kind of pooled our resources together, it would have been a lot better. And one of the epiphanies I had with that was, I was down working with some schools in Dallas ISD, and they had like an instructional technology department that had like 40 people in it. And I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. Just for one district. I mean, Dallas is a massive district, but they just pulled all their resources. And then what happened was they were able to create these massive libraries of content that they would share out. So what I would suggest is, if you have a lot of instructional tech coaches or just teachers on the leading edge, like really spend some time thinking about how can you pool your resources and share out your content, because I guarantee there's duplicitous work happening in just about every district from well-meaning people, but they haven't made that connection with others, and they haven't really found a way to share it. So the more that you can try to establish that connection, the better. It's just going to save a lot of people a lot of time and free up the bandwidth to do other things. Like, say I'm a coach and I have to make a how to access Clever tutorial. Well, why would we need 15 different teachers all making that same Clever tutorial if we can just pull our resources together? All right, so I'm off that soapbox. This is the Worcester Public Schools example. And if you click on it, it'll bring up a landing page, and it has a few of the main resources that families could go to. But what I really like, well, two things I really like about this is, first, they provided a lot of different modalities for it, right? So for instance, They have clear visuals, for instance, for the Clever login. I just remember when we first rolled out Clever in my district, man, that was an adventure in a lot of different ways. So the easier you can get that up and running and making it easier for families, the better. And then they also have video tutorials with multiple languages, right? So again, trying to make this accessible to as many people as possible. And actually at the bottom here, you can click on, they have their own YouTube channel, which I thought was pretty slick. And on that channel, it would actually have all of the different translated versions. So for instance, this is how to get into Clever, but translated into what I'm assuming are the core languages spoken by parents in that school district. So shout out to Worcester for that work. The next one I wanted to highlight is the page for New Bedford Public Schools. And this one, similar to before, it had a whole series of family engagement videos, and also similar had different translations, right? So they have a whole tab for English, Spanish, Portuguese, and they also had the different topics for each one. So it wasn't just like one video translated over, they actually did a few different topics here. So one is like parent-teacher conferences, how to use Class Dojo, using technology wisely. So again, another shout out to that district for providing some resources for families to jump in and engage with. All right, so this next one is one from a school district in Pennsylvania. And the reason why I'm going to show you this is a little bit different approach, right? So this one was a little bit more Google Apps for Education specific. However, I think it was a good use of the tool because they actually built this entire thing within one Google slide deck, right? So just one easy link and file to share with everybody, and everything was embedded in one spot. So just to show you what this looks like, and again, feel free to open this up and check it out. They used Slides Mania for a template. So if you haven't seen that before, Slides Mania, Slides Carnival, there's a few other ones out there. They have a lot of really nice templates that you can use. You could also use something like Canva for education. But long story short, they just kind of went through, they highlighted the core apps that they're going to be using in their district. They embedded instructional technology tutorials. And again, you don't have to reinvent the wheel with all this stuff. So this particular district, it doesn't even look like they made a lot of their videos in-house. They just found things from like New Tech Classroom or some of the more popular instructional tech websites out there. And they embedded them into, they made it kind of look like a notebook, but it's a digital slides presentation that goes through the different apps. So from a parent's guide to Google Classroom, submitting assignments, navigation. So a lot of those ins and outs, things that folks would have questions about. And again, a lot of this seems basic, but even in schools that have different, management systems through the grades, like I know a lot of districts that they might be K-2 Seesaw or K-3 Seesaw, and then they go to grade 4 and it's Google Classroom. Well, guess what? A lot of those kids have no idea how you use Google Classroom. It's just something that they have to pick up and learn. Parents have to learn. So having these guides and having them all in one spot is very helpful. The other thing I want to point out, and you saw a little bit on the Worcester schools and the New Bedford, but it's the accessing resources. So for this particular school district, they use ClassLink. If you're not familiar with ClassLink, it's basically a competitor of Clever, same idea, kind of like a single sign-on solution. But I had a tech director I used to work with, and she said this about a lot of things actually, but like, every district's a special snowflake when it comes to this type of stuff. Like there's always these different quirks and workflows, and you got to go here first, and then you log into that. And the way that it's explained by like some of the IT folks that set it up, it's like, oh, that's super easy, right? And then, but if you really, take a step back for a less than tech savvy person, that may not be easy at all. So having very clear visuals, clear walkthroughs and presentations, and making it accessible is really important, because there are some teachers that still struggle with some of these sign-ins to things. And I understand it can get pretty complicated. So the more guides we can provide for teachers and for families, the better. All right, so that's an example from Pennsylvania school district. All right, so just to recap a few things here before we close out. We started out with talking about some of the different core tools, right, that you can add in from Google for Education. The main ones that I suggest are that family video guide, the best practices family engagement worksheet, and using some of those digital citizenship tools like Interland and Be Internet Awesome. If you wanted to venture into the whole idea of, filtering and monitoring for parents' sake, I would actually suggest using the Google Family Link app, right? I haven't heard of a ton of districts that use it at like scale as a district. It may not be completely usable yet, I'm not sure, but I do know for families themselves, it does work, and I can vouch for it as a good tool to check out. If it's general tech skills, if you're looking for resources there, my big suggestion, apply digital skills, use that. And then my two main suggestions for other than Google platforms would be Common Sense Media, a lot of information there, ConnectSafely, and then also the last part, look at other schools as a model, right? So what can you learn from the way other schools design it? What could you take from it? What would you want to improve and make better? And then how can we strategically do this in our schools? If you're on the call or if you're watching this on YouTube and you're a classroom teacher, think about what resources you could just provide directly to parents, but also think about what might you want to share kind of like upstream, like to the folks that might be the coordinators or the tech coaches, because again, the more we can share these ideas and coordinate, the more time it's going to save and the easier it's going to be for families to access all of this information. All right, so that brings us to the close of our workshop. Just a couple last things to share as far as links. The Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education do have links to a family portal and then a few other documents I linked at the end. So there's a coordinated family and community engagement network link, family engagement framework, and then there's more of a consolidated community partnership fundamentals document. Some of these can get pretty dense and in the weeds, but these are certainly things to check out if you're looking for supports for families or places to point families as far as more places to get support. And we also do have an upcoming, two more upcoming workshops. We have one coming up on the 27th at 3:30. That's going to be by my colleague Avra. She is fantastic, and she is an expert in digital portfolios. So she's going to focus on that for that session. Also, like always, we love your session feedback. So I'm going to add that to the chat right now. You guys have any thoughts on how the session went today? We would truly appreciate it. So click on the link in the slide deck or click on the link in the chat. What went well? What might you want to improve on future sessions? And then also feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'm on social media at Tom Driscoll EDU. I'm active on Twitter, somewhat on Instagram. I need to get a little bit better at that. You can also reach us at edtechteacher.org. We have events, we have webinars, we work with districts directly. Feel free to reach out if you want to coordinate some time to work with us in the future. We'd be happy to partner with you guys. And other than that, I'd like to thank you guys for joining. Have a great rest of the day and hope to see you guys at our next workshop. Take care, everyone.